And my name is David Tate. I'm a member of the Special Events Committee of Encore Learning. The committee helps develop these programs. And if you're at all interested in joining, helping out with the fun, send an email or call Encore Learning and let them know that you're interested. We'd be really glad to have you join in with the committee. I don't say work, but fun. Actually, it really is. And so I have the pleasure today of introducing our guests and the presentation. And sometimes we have topics related to news that we can't escape from, and sometimes we have topics that allow you to momentarily escape from the ever-present news cycle. And today we have a bit really of the latter. I think it'll be a fun presentation, and we have Michael Stewart with us to talk about daylight savings time. And of course, we all know about daylight savings time, but we may not be familiar with its genesis, its impact, and ongoing debate about its retention. Now, Mike served 28 years in the United States Army, where he served in intelligence and operations. After retirement, he continued to support the national defense in a variety of companies, including his own consulting company. He's had a lifelong interest and passion about time and how humans manage it, spend it, and complain about it. The genesis of his passion was viewing a 1974 video by time management guru Alan Lakin called Time of Your Life, narrated by James Whitmore. And this passion led to his trying to better understand daylight savings time. So sit back and relax, forget about the time that's passing as we listen to Michael Stewart enlighten us about daylight savings time. Michael, take it away.
Thanks very much, David. And thanks to Chris McLaughlin, David, Laura, and Terry for allowing and making sure I'm squared away to present this topic today. And this is coming to you from Tucson, Arizona. It's probably about 55 degrees here, a bit breezy, but certainly warmer than your weather there. I want to emphasize, I'm not an academic, and maybe I'm a wannabe, but I am certainly not an academic. So this research, or this is not research in a scientific sense, and I suppose it's best characterized as a literature review. And I've had a long fascination with time and the concept of time, the various models that we use to measure it and abide by it. And as David said, it's been that way since about 1978, when I was a young lieutenant at Fort Hood, Texas. And part of the effort was to better manage time through a process called training management. Some of you may be familiar with that. Alan Lakin's video hooked me. And it also hooked President Bill Clinton, who identified it as a great resource as he navigated life and politics as related in his book, My Life. But it hadn't been a steady trajectory. Only in the last several years have I devoted effort to better understanding time and how we humans use it. That resulted in a class on decision-making in life, which I presented to Encore in the spring of 2019. Like others, I've discussed and cussed daylight savings time, mostly in the spring when we spring forward, for a long time. Why haven't we made daylight savings time permanent? During the COVID summer, I decided to dig into daylight savings time, and what I discovered really burst my previously held view that we should just unilaterally adopt permanent daylight savings time. And I thought it was simple, but it's complicated, very complicated. It matters where you're located, what longitude, what latitude, what social time you're located in. and as well as your chronotype, and I'll talk about several of these later on. So what is daylight savings time? As David talked about, daylight savings time is a modification to standard time. And standard time is simply a model that we humans use to manage various life activities like business, appointments of various kinds, and those sorts of things. It's how we get through the day, it's how we get through the week, and it's how we get through the rest of our time. And I think many of us channel Maxine here. Remember, it's spring forward, fall back, and why the heck are we still doing this? We're still doing this because it's very, very complicated. I have great empathy for the couple in the on the right-hand side of the chart, or left-hand side as you look at it. Both my wife and I like clocks, and we have quite a few. Happily, during our stay here in Arizona, we don't worry about resetting the clocks, just the battery changes. And here's what we'll be talking about today. Some of the mechanics where I talk about longitude, latitude, and other things. A short discussion of the U.S. legislative history, rulemaking experience, primarily through the Office of the Secretary of Transportation, although predecessor organization was the Interstate Commerce Commission. And then we'll look at a couple of approaches that the states have taken. We'll talk about how the rest of the world approaches time and whether they follow daylight savings time. I'll tell you up front that only about 25% or less of the world's population observes daylight savings time, and it continues to decline as we go forward. And then one of the areas where it's probably been given short shrift in the past, the health concerns with these semi-annual changes in our case, but also the health concerns with persistent daylight savings time. And then we'll talk about the prospects going forward. Now, this is a pretty important slide. It's basic and fundamental to understanding the impact of daylight savings time on our bodies. Solar time, or sun time, as I'll refer to it throughout the rest of the presentation, is basically when it's at the highest point of the day. That's called noon in that particular location. As we know, the Earth rotates, and so that is a constant revolution of time. So the sun clock shows the apparent progression of the sun. Noon is when the sun is highest, and midnight being exactly halfway between dusk and dawn. The circadian rhythm, or body time, as I'll refer to it the rest of the class, is the internal processor for the organism, in our discussion, our human bodies. And according to Till Ronenberg, who is a professor at the Institute of Medical Psychology, Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, Germany, almost all of our physiological functions, reading certain genes and activating certain proteins, as well as cognitive capabilities and sleep cycles, are determined by this body clock. And in turn, it is set predominantly by light and darkness. And this has gotten somewhat impacted and degraded over time because of the impact of the artificial light we find in our lives today. And finally, the social clock is set by a political legislative process. Only within the last 150 years or so has the social clock become more meaningful and impactful than sun time. We'll see in a few slides the railroad grid in the late 1800s, United States. The railroads were the principal forcing agent in adopting a worldwide recognized time zone for the masses. Professor Ronenberg and other researchers have identified and labeled the disconnect or mismatch between sun time and our body time as social jet lag, or SJL. The study of social jet lag effects has primarily focused on the acute impacts. We'll discuss this later in our discussion. Chronic impacts haven't received much attention at all. In fact, at the time that Professor Ronenberg wrote this article in August 2019, there had only been 2 real studies on the chronic impacts or long-term impacts of the social jet lag associated with daylight savings time. And the professor also uses some commonly recognized stereotypes for whether we're get up early and stay up late. And he uses the term chronotype. And for the early birds, he uses the lark. And for night owls, he uses night owls or owls. And he does use doves for the center of mass population. At this time, I'd like to do a poll. And if you all could say whether you think you're a morning person or a night owl, that would be useful. And I didn't give you the opportunity to be a dove in the middle. We want to see what everybody thinks at the outer boundaries here. Okay, why don't we go ahead and shut down the poll for a moment. Okay. Laura, do I share? Okay, great. Thank you very much, Laura. That's pretty representative, I think. I don't have anything to compare this to, but I was thinking earlier today about who might be perceived as larks. Benjamin Franklin was certainly an early bird. I would say that night owls would include Tony Soprano and probably a good portion of junior high and high school students. So it's interesting. I'm going to capture that if you don't mind. 56%, 44%. Great, thank you very much.
Hey, Michael, this is David. I'd read just maybe a side note that teenagers, their circadian rhythm actually shifts significantly towards the evening. So they become night owls, and then in their 20s, it actually reverts to what I would call more normal, maybe in more ways in circadian rhythm. But is that something you've come across in your research?
Yeah, when I was still in Northern Virginia, and we only moved out here in April, I had done some research based on a question I got in one of my decision-making classes. And part of the research indicates that trying to make high school students go to class as early as we do is counterproductive. They're not as engaged. They don't have maximum cognitive presence available. And so that tracks with what I've understood. Thanks very much, David. Okay, I apologize on this, but I'm going to be the one doing most of the talk. In fact, all of the talking on why time is important.
Michael, let me one question is probably related to what we just talked about is, has the COVID isolation impacted or you think that it's impacted our chronotypes? So for example, with Netflix binging or other aspects where we're not as tied to the clock anymore.
Um, I would say there's probably been some impact. I can't hope to have any idea how it impacts people. And of course, it's going to be on an individual basis. So there may be some more commentary or observations on this later in the class. And the why time is important. There are various religious activities, commercial activities, contractual law, legal, criminality, prohibition of things. For instance, I went back and did a little bit of research on the Volstead Act, which was the enactment of the 18th Amendment and prohibition. And there was a specific time that prohibition was in effect, and it was at 12:00:01, and that was 1 second after midnight on January 17th, 1920. And they documented that the first violation of the Volstead Act occurred on that same morning at 12:59. And there's a long story behind that. Basically, a train got robbed of medicinal whiskey. And then, of course, the repeal. As you all know, it takes 2/3 of the states to implement an amendment to the Constitution. And in this case, the state of Virginia ratified this amendment, I don't remember, 21st Amendment, on October 25th, 1933. And then Utah was the 36th state to ratify the amendment. So it became law on or about December 5th, 1933. And across the nation, people were listening into the Utah legislature have that debate. In my home state of Kansas, I could legally drink beer at the age of 18, not when I was 17 and 364 days. In Kansas, it was at that point 21 for hard liquor. Transportation and travel. At the end of World War II, General Albert Wiedemeyer was in charge of U.S. troops in the Chinese-Burmese theater. And it was, as you know, this war was over in September, but Wiedemeyer had been planning to transition the Chinese nation from driving left side to driving right side to be more compatible with U.S. troop movements and supplies and that sort of thing. He went ahead and executed the plan, and he chose midnight, 31 December 1945 as the time of transition. And that was obviously an important timeline. U.S. census, where we lived on 1 April 2020 was how you were counted. And on 1 April 2021, the Census Bureau will deliver the redistricting counts to the states. Medicare and Social Security, 65 for Medicare, 62, depending on your age, I think, for early Social Security, 66 and 67 for full retirement age. So time is important, and there are many, many other ideas. If you've got some, throw them into the Q&A and I'll take those on board.
Yeah, Michael, we do have a few in the queue if you want to take those now. One is just a quick one is probably, why do people misquote it as daylight savings time? I guess the reference is not really saving time, it's clock shift. I guess maybe that's what the reference is.
Yeah, the legislation says daylight saving as opposed to savings. And I'm not quite sure of the reason, other than it may have been some sort of marketing effort on the part of the people who were driving it. So
There's a question about making daylight savings time permanent, but I think you've got a whole section on that later on, right?
I do.
Yeah, so maybe save that. And then I think this question maybe makes reference to more of a time management. I'll read it. So did you mean day and night time, or the use and planning of time? I personally find that one has to coordinate private time with what is going on during the business day and with the outside world. So maybe that's kind of trying to balance life between business and personal, and managing time, maybe when you don't have control of the whole day or something like that.
Yeah, I think that I'll address that peripherally toward the end of the slides, and if we can just hold that one until that time, and maybe I'll answer it in my narrative.
Sure. Okay. Thanks. That's it. That's it for now.
Okay, thanks. And then, of course, for those of you who have seen Independence Day, a 1996 film, extraterrestrials came calling, and they used our satellite timing to coordinate a worldwide simultaneous attack. And Will Smith tallied the first win, or first kill, against an extraterrestrial alien in that movie. And then there's always the effort to drive tourism. And you can see at time, the international date line there. By design, it would be right down the middle, and things would be, there wouldn't be all these indents. But the island of Kiritimati, which is part of the Kiribati chain, and also known as Christmas Island, as well as the island of Samoa, all accelerate their time in order to be first of the new year. And the Kiribati's did that in order to generate some tourism for those who wanted to experience the first opportunity for New Year's. And as we'll see later on, in 2017, Tonga was also part of that effort to be first in the world for New Year's, but their business and commerce imperative caused them to move back to the other side of the date line in order to stay more synchronized with New Zealand and Australia. And of course, if you're on the International Space Station, you were able to enjoy 15 New Years. And here's our dose of humor today. Just 5 minutes more. Let's get into some mechanics. This daylight savings topic is fundamentally a bunch of policy models designed around the relationship of the Earth, the sun, people, and the political entities that provide those policy models. The best term I've found so far to describe at least part of this is from the NASA website, heliophysics. There's probably a better word, but so far I haven't found it. So now here's how the various authorities have laid out the Earth. You'll see the horizontal line, red line there, and that's 0 degrees longitude. The vertical line is longitude, and the horizontal line is 0 degrees across the equator for latitude. And the Earth rotates every 24 hours, more or less. One study indicates that 3 billion years ago, the transit time was 22 hours. And so our Earth is in a constant state of change. And if you look at a desk model of a globe. It's on a little bit of a tilt, and as you spin it, there's absolutely no wobble. It operates perfectly, but that's not actually how things go. Up until about 2000, the spin, or the north axis, was slowly moving toward piece of Canada. In 2002, it abruptly changed and is now transferring to the British Isles. So 360 degrees, 180 degrees west, 180 degrees east, and the Earth rotates in 24 hours, although we do make up some extra seconds every leap year. 360 degrees, 15 degrees per hour in a perfectly laid out model. 4 minutes per degree, and date line is approximately mid-Pacific, shown here on the edges. Interestingly, you can see 0 latitude, 0 longitude here at where the two red lines cross. And that's known as the Null Island. And there's a sea buoy there that gives off various environmental signals. So, and here's
Michael,
our US time zone.
On the international time zones, we do have a question about half-hour increments. I know I've noticed those looking at a time zone map and wonder what the heck is going on there. And also, isn't China all on one time zone technically?
Yeah, and I'll talk about both of those a little bit later, but that's absolutely on target.
Okay.
Okay, and let me just talk about a few things of each of these time zones. The Eastern time zone is based on the 75-degree west longitude. And if I'd had sufficient wits about me, I would have found a better map that shows where that 75-degree west longitude line is. But center line is just about Philly, and Washington, D.C. is just to the west of that center line. And if you take the easternmost edge of Maine and the westernmost edge of Indiana, that's 67 degrees and 87 degrees. That's a delta of 20 degrees. And at 4 minutes per degree, that's a spread of 80 minutes. And so it's greater than a standard time zone. Central time is based on the 90-degree west longitude, and the center point runs north to south, basically through New Orleans, Memphis, and St. Louis are the three most prominent cities there. And doing the same thing from the easternmost edge to the westernmost edge. And these are all rough orders of magnitude. They're not exact, but there's a delta of about 18 degrees. So that's a spread of about an hour and 20 minutes. Mountain time is 105 degrees west longitude with a center point running through Denver. And the delta is about 17 degrees, which equates to about 68 minutes, just a little more than an hour. And Pacific time is based on the 120-degree west longitude, center point Santa Barbara, just to the west of, in the vicinity of Los Angeles. Again, eastern to western edge is a delta of about 9 degrees. And at about 4 minutes per degree, that's a spread of 36 minutes. So as we go across the nation, the time zones become more compact. And again, in a theoretical environment, some time is noon. You can see that I've divided the standard grid of one time zone into 3 subzones. And 15 degrees equals 60 minutes, and therefore the subzone A, B, and C are all equivalent. But the leading edge of zone A is 60 minutes sunrise before the western edge of subzone C. And as we talked about, sun time, or our standard time, is based on 15-degree increments: 15, 30, 120, 135, 165, 180. So the sun time of the leading edge is 12:30 p.m. and the trailing edge is 11:30 a.m. Eastern time, the leading edge sun time, noon, in that time zone is 12:32, and the trailing edge is 11:12 because of that large spread in minutes. For nova, you're approximately 2 degrees west of 75 degrees longitude. So that's about 8 minutes. So your sun time is approximately 11:52 a.m. when the Eastern time zone, 75 longitude, is noon. But as we'll find out, during daylight savings time, that shifts you to about 10:52 a.m. Okay, the genesis of the US legislation that eventually brought us time zones, standard time, and daylight savings time is based on standard railway time. And the railways were dealing with lots of station masters who kept local time, and they were unable to synchronize across this network of long distance railroading. And there were two things that allowed this to happen: obviously the railroads, but also the telegraph, which allowed the synchronization along these railroad lines. And this was agreed to by the General Time Convention in 1883 and adopted in November of '83 by the US railroads depicted here. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Okay, I pulled this off of a article that was in the, this is all part of the CDC. It's the National Institute of Health, National Library of Medicine, and it's in the PubMed area. But the article talked specifically about the impact of sunlight as you go further north or further south if you're in the southern hemisphere. You can see that at 15 degrees latitude, there's not that much variation between hours of darkness and hours of daylight as the seasons turn. There's only about 2 hours difference per day. But as you go further north at 40 degrees, you're getting probably 6 additional hours. And you can see on across that as you get up to 0 or 60 degrees, you don't have much nighttime and you got a whole lot of daytime. And just to give you some representative, the southern tip of Florida is about 25 degrees north latitude. So it's somewhere between the 15 and 40. The northern border with Canada is generally along the 48-degree north latitude, which is just a little bit north of the second depiction. And then the Alaska southern boundary is about 60 degrees north latitude. And so that's why they get quite a bit more sunshine during their relatively short summer and a lot more nighttime during their winter. Moving on to legislative history and references. As I said, in 1883, the standard railway time was adopted. In 1918, the Congress enacted an act to establish time zones in law, leveraging standard railway time. And they set daylight savings time in response to Germany first establishing daylight savings time. I think it was 1916, and Great Britain joined shortly thereafter. And the idea was to increase productivity and reduce energy drain. Our experience with daylight savings time was short-lived. Congress passed, I believe it was attached to an appropriations bill in 1919. President Wilson was adamant that we maintain daylight savings time, and so he vetoed the bill. I don't recall if it was a separate piece of legislation, but I think President Wilson vetoed again, and his veto was overridden. So we have our standard time zones, but no daylight savings time. There were various activities by Congress for technical and just moving certain pieces of states from one time zone to another. The Panhandle and Plains in Texas and Oklahoma moved to the Central Time Zone as a result of the 1921 Act. 1923 transferred Idaho south of the Salmon River to the Mountain Time Zone. And then in 1942, here comes wartime. It was a rally cry, and I believe it was permanent year-round. And then after World War II, we went back to standard time, at least from a federal level. Now, there were a lot of different approaches to time, and it was almost incomprehensible. Counties were determining their own time. And so in 1966, Congress enacted the Uniform Time Act, wherein the last Sunday in April and the last Sunday in October were the changeover dates for changing from one system to another. There were exemptions by Hawaii, Arizona, Michigan, which reversed itself in 1973 and adopted daylight savings time, and Indiana, which reversed itself in 2005, effective 2006. During the hearings for the daylight savings time, Keith Sebelius, who was a representative from Kansas, my representative, as a matter of fact, testified as a witness, hoping to limit daylight savings time to 3 months. Despite all the rumors you hear that farmers were a large demographic behind daylight savings time, I don't believe it was true from everybody I've talked to. And then there were other activities by Congress. In 1983, the Interstate Commerce Commission, which had authority for rulemaking regarding standard time and time zones and daylight savings time, was sunsetted. I don't know of any other federal agency that's ever been sunsetted, maybe a one and only. But then it moved to the Office of the Secretary of Transportation. 1986 saw the change from the last to the first Sunday in April. And then in 2005, we changed from the second Sunday in March to the first Sunday in November. In the 116th Congress, which was the last Congress, Senator Marco Rubio from Florida had a bill, Senate 670, Save the Sunshine Act, never got a hearing, and so that was dead. Companion bill was also submitted in the House, 1556. As far as the 117th Congress, who knows? I just don't know. We'll see. Now, because this is such an important piece of legislation, you don't need to read this, but I wanted to show you. It's basically a long 2 pages of text signed by John McCormick, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and Hubert Humphrey, who was Vice President and President of the Senate, and Lyndon Baines Johnson. Let's go on to rulemaking. And I'm probably going to have to do a little bit of acceleration here. My time management has not been that good. Public Law 97449 transferred authority for making regulations concerning this topic, taking it from the Interstate Commerce Commission and installing it in the Office of the Secretary of Transportation. Secretary of Transportation, I suspect, thought that the ICC had not done a very good job of identifying the factors that it would use to determine requests for changes. So they developed a checklist, and it's basically, what is the basic environment of a location that has requested a change? Where is most of its business done? Who are its business partners? Where do they receive their television and radio broadcasts from? Where are the newspapers that they read published? The nearest bus and passenger rail services, nearest airport, and where do these people work? Do they commute? And, is there a principal place where they commute, and what time zone is that in? And then where they go to school, recreation, healthcare, and religious service. And this is all found in the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 49. Let's get into some individual cases. This one is straightforward. West Wendover, Nevada is a pretty isolated town in Nevada. Its major activities have to do with Salt Lake City. And so it was initiated by the mayor of West Wendover. And again, it was straightforward. The question that crossed my mind was, did the state or the county get a vote in the process? And I haven't had time to research that. I would hope that any future federal legislation would address that. In 2003, a final rule to incorporate a statutory change that took place in 2000 for the Chamorro time zone. It was ministerial in nature. They didn't ask for any comments. They just did it because Congress had already acted. Now we'll take a look at some of the states. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures website and the Congressional Research Service report of September 30th, 2020, 32 states considered some form of change in 2020, while in 2019, it was 40 state legislatures. That is a lot of activity in the state legislatures agitating. And so at some point, Congress is going to have to act. One of the more interesting cases is the state of Indiana. we could probably do a special event exclusively on the history of time and daylight savings time in Indiana. And my following remarks are based on an incomplete set of records, but I do reflect what I believe are accurate depictions of what's occurred. You see insets of the northwest counties and the southwest counties. Both of these sections of the state have gone back and forth with the Office of the Secretary of Transportation. As you recall, the western boundary of Indiana, for that part of the state that observes Eastern time, is the far west boundary of the Eastern time zone. And so that is 80 minutes to the west of the Eastern boundary. And in the Northwest, it kind of makes sense that those counties would have more to do with the city of Chicago and the environment than Indianapolis, which was much further to the southeast. But the southwest counties are really, really interesting. In 2006, January, the southwest counties had requested a move from the Eastern time zone to the Central time zone. And the request was approved effective 2006 in April. In 2006, in August, the Office of the Secretary of Transportation again accepted a request for the Southwest counties to return to Eastern time from Central time. And it's just the record in the Federal Register notice of proposed rulemaking and the final rules are just fascinating. I'd encourage you to take another look at that if it is of more interest. Another interesting case is Arizona. And you will hear this referred to as the donut hole. Arizona observes standard time. After daylight savings time legislation was approved in 1966, it took the state legislature here a couple of years to get the topic onto the agenda for the state legislature, and they went back to standard time shortly after that legislation was passed. But the Navajo Nation is an entity with its own sovereignty for these purposes, and they chose to observe daylight savings time. And that's because while a large portion of the Navajo Nation is located in northeast Arizona, large segments of the reservation are also located in New Mexico and Utah. And so I haven't delved into the detail on Navajo Nation governance, but I'm sure that that's what drove that. Within, wholly enclosed within the Navajo Nation is the Hopi Nation, and they're entirely within the boundaries of the state of Arizona, and they've chosen to stay with standard time with the state. And thus we have the donut hole. Let's talk a little bit about Virginia, District of Columbia, and Maryland. We talked about you're about 2 degrees to the west of the 75 degree west longitude. So your delta sun time is about 7 degrees and therefore 28 minutes. In Virginia in 2018, a House Bill 1330 was submitted and never got out of committee. It was tabled within the Rules Committee. In 2019, a proposal was made directing the Secretary of Commerce and Trade in Virginia to study the effects of the Uniform Time Act of '66, as well as the potential consequences of either standard time or daylight savings time year round, and it failed. The Virginia Code section is 1-253 if you're interested. And similarly, Maryland had a bill submitted in both houses of the legislature to establish daylight savings time year round, and it failed due to session adjournment. And their section in their code is 1-301. The DC code is 28-2711. I didn't find any effort on the part of the DC Council to weigh in on this topic. And very quickly, I want to go around the world. Mostly North America observes daylight savings time, although there are exceptions. Arizona, I don't remember what the state in Mexico is south of the Arizona border, but they don't observe daylight savings time. And Canada is a real patchwork. Their provinces have a lot more autonomy than our states do here. The European Union has voted to exit from mandatory daylight savings time, and it's going to allow individual states to determine what their time zone will be. I don't have any read on how that's going. Further, the Nordic Council, consisting of Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, has called for a single time zone for that area. Most of Asia does not. Russia eliminated daylight savings time in 2014. In China, as David and one of the participants observed, although China spans 5 different time zones, they elect to be in the a single time zone. And it just so happens that the time zone meridian for that time zone is firmly centered on Beijing. Most of Africa does not use daylight savings time, and most of South America does not. And in response to the question Dave posed earlier, there are 3 nations that have offsets. Iran is plus 3.5 for Coordinated Universal Time, or UTC. The eastern edge is at about 62 degrees east longitude, and the western edge is about 44 degrees east longitude. And so it's kind of centered between 45 degrees and 60 degrees. And so they've, frankly, it kind of makes sense to me that their sun time is 52.5 degrees east longitude. So they don't suffer as much social jet lag as other places. India is at 5.5, and I won't go through the numbers, but again, it essentially centers their time zone on the center of the country. And then Nepal, relatively small country, and again, they've chosen to basically centerline their time zone. No need to read this. It's just something to attract your attention. But recently, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine put out a position paper, and they called on a halt to daylight savings time because of especially the semi-annual changes. But they've done a lot of research, and it causes increased cardiovascular morbidity, increased medical missed appointments, increased emergency room visits as somebody gets up on a ladder to change time and falls down and breaks a bone or gets a gash, increased mood disturbances and suicide risk, increased risk of fatal crashes, increased risk of medical errors. Additionally, the New England Journal of Medicine has confirmed car accidents and heart attacks increase, mostly during the spring change. The Journal of Applied Psychology has noted increased work injuries. Japanese Sleep and Biological Rhythms Journal has noted increased suicide. And Danish Epidemiology has identified increased depressions. And it's important to point out that most of these studies are based on chronic studies. There haven't been a lot of acute studies. And that's what Professor Ronenberg, who I mentioned earlier on, has discussed. So it's complicated. You got to know where you are, whether you're in the northern or southern hemisphere. Changeover dates have been highly variable. The basic options appear to be permanent standard time, permanent daylight savings time, semi-annual changes, and other things. And there are obviously cascading dependencies. Some other recommendations, I'm not sure, I suspect that they might have been tongue-in-cheek, but there was a recent article in Quartz, I believe, that the author called for 2 time zones for the US. Another article I read called for a single unitary world time, and other opportunities. Problem with some of these, you still have the challenges of changing times, but more importantly, you become more disconnected from the actual sun time where you live. One recommendation that I came across in the last month or so was a letter published on 21 November by the Wilton, Connecticut, Westport, Weston Chamber of Commerce. In order to accommodate mandated early closures, the article suggested shifting meal hours forward in order to continue supporting local restaurants. Necessity is the mother of invention. However, this means I'll have more competition for my early bird specials if it's adopted here. So, sun time, body time, social time. It all makes a difference, as does longitude and latitude. We've covered US legislative history, US rulemaking, the state's approach, how the rest of the world approaches this, some of the health concerns and the prospects. As I said, we'll see. I suspect we'll see somebody submit a bill. At least Senator Rubio probably will. I think Florida has an amplified desire for permanent daylight savings time as they're a resort and recreation vacation mecca. So with that, David, shall we open it up to questions?
Sure. Yeah. We have a few questions. I mean, let's, in terms of, I mean, you kind of covered the some of the pros and cons of changing the current regime, and I guess what do you think for yourself makes sense? What do you think, if you can have a crystal ball for a moment, what do you think might eventually happen in the U.S. or maybe in the world?
Well, the rest of the world is moving away from daylight savings time. So I think we probably ought to follow their lead. But there are obviously commercial interests and business interests that are more predominant in certain areas of the country. So I think that the Congress needs to provide maximum flexibility to the states and let the states decide what's best for them. And as I said, Senator Rubio will probably submit a bill. And I hope it gets a hearing, and I hope it gets voted on, and I hope it's as much flexibility for the states as possible.
So the rest of the world is moving to always standard time versus moving to always the daylight saving time shift?
And I may have missed a few, but if you go to Wikipedia and search standard time or daylight savings time, it's got every nation in the world, and makes you think when large countries like Russia and China have no daylight savings time. I don't think any of the other large countries have daylight savings time either. So I think we ought to follow. But again, it's got to provide flexibility for the individual states, in my view.
Yeah, let me go back to a question that I read before. Is from Carol. She's actually left, and thank you a lot for your presentation already, but thank you for the presentation. But the question, I'll just read it. Did you mean day and night time or the use of planning of time? I personally find that one has to coordinate private time with what is going on during the business day and with the outside world. So I'm not sure what all is contained in that, but maybe you can speak to whatever you think might be an interesting note.
I'm not sure what she was getting at with the daytime, nighttime. But as I think the example that I gave about the Wilton, Connecticut recommendation to establish restaurant time where people basically start an hour earlier in order to accommodate early closures mandated by the state. And I think that certainly corporate America can probably do a little bit better there, in my view. And I haven't done extensive research on this or looked at how things are going. But for instance, when I was still full-time at one of those defense companies, I ran my meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning, which was not very convenient for the people in California. And so if I had been wiser, but my schedule was mandated by a corporate schedule, which was on Eastern time. So just think that there's a lot of education in terms of both the chronic, and I hope that there are a lot more studies on the acute impacts of the shift to daylight savings time. And it's interesting that many of the studies I've read indicate that they would prefer the twice annual changes from a health view than permanent daylight savings time, if that's the choice. I'm not sure I answered the question, but
Yeah, well, isn't there a lot of traffic? I've read that there's a lot more traffic accidents right after we change the time. So, I mean,
yeah,
literally,
that's
people
been
being
clearly documented in
dying because,
study after study.
what's that?
That's clearly been documented in study after study that, um, it's the morning commute and the evening commute are both provide, number one, pretty different conditions for the commute, but at least in the springtime, you're also deprived of an hour of sleep, which doesn't sound like much, but the medical studies have shown that there's a significant impact from that loss of 1 hour of sleep.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, to kind of continue on that thought, Mike inquires. He said he thought in part that daylight savings time was established to maximize the daytime during which children could safely meet their school buses, and also notes "Go Army." So, okay, well,
Go Army, beat Navy. They did this year. The only reference to school children issues that I saw was obviously the bus pickup in the morning when not as much light was available if you were on permanent daylight savings time. Certainly it's consideration, but more recent studies have looked at that and determined that the danger to school children is a little bit overblown. Certainly any accident is a tragedy, but correlation is not causation.
okay, yeah, and so someone is inquiring about are we making this? Are we taping this and making this available? This presentation, and the answer is we are. It will be posted like a lot of others that we have done on the website, which I think takes you to a link on YouTube. So take a little time to actually put that up, but it will eventually make it onto the website. And also, Marty is wondering if a lot of this research you've done, if you've written it down, maybe published it. Sounds like maybe a potential book or something.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. Yeah, our second grandson arrived in September, so my book plan was shown it aside. But yeah, if I can get it into some sort of recognizable and readable format, I plan to do that. And if it's done, it'll be through Kindle publishing because that seems to be the easiest way to do it. But I appreciate that.
Okay, Michael, that's all the questions we have in the queue, but I know you had mentioned that you did have an interest in allowing people to talk about their experiences, relationship with time, and maybe you can just tee that up, and while people have an opportunity to find their raised hand button, once you raise your hand, I will recognize you and allow you to talk if you're interested. But go ahead and tee up the nature of your inquiry, Michael.
Yeah, the inquiry was basically twofold. The first was who you thought might be considered either historical figures or current figures, larks and owls. And then the second thing was give me a second, I've got to find it.
Well, yeah, I thought it was personal stories, but I mean, while you're looking for that, go ahead and take some time. I just say that, I always seem to forget to change the clocks, and on a number of occasions have been actually early to someone's house. And so I guess that's mainly in the fall. I forget. And also I had there in college where I was driving from Illinois to Indiana to a sporting event, and I along the way, my friend and I realized that, yeah, it had switched to daylight savings time, but we also couldn't remember if Indiana was actually on daylight savings time. We probably knew it was on East Coast time, although that's been back and forth on Indiana and it too. But to make a long story short, somehow it all canceled out. And we arrived on time, but only by pure luck. But
Right.
anyway, so Michael, what you want to clarify? What else?
Yeah. The other thing is, why is time important to us? And I went through some things. I talked about retirement age for Social Security, Medicare, eligibility age. But there are probably things that I haven't thought of yet. So I'd appreciate audience feedback on, contracts, personal stories.
Okay. I'm not seeing any raised hands. Laura, as a host, maybe you're seeing some, maybe it's not showing up.
Don't see any. People are welcome to raise their hand. Okay,
we have one from Tom. A brave soul is going to step forward, and I'm allowing you to speak. Tom, go ahead. Oh, just make sure you're unmuted and go ahead and speak.
Okay, I've unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to be a little silly, although I don't really like all the effects that carrying a phone in my pocket causes and the need to use it so much. I was thinking you could have personal time wherever your GPS system computes where you are, and it could be personal time, say that for you noon would always be when the sun is overhead, and people would figure out if you said, well, come and meet me for lunch at 1, they could use their personal time and their phone to calculate, when they should set out to get to your place at 1.
You're trying
Silly
to make
question, but
that's great. Okay. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I don't have any response to that. Yeah. Yeah, I think that you're always going to you have to manage the edge between people. In that case, where you've invited somebody to lunch. And I think that I think our phones do that now. So
okay, I realized it was meant to be provocative. But essentially, it's saying, what are your anchor points? Should when the sun is at its highest, should that be noon? And then averaging out, working at where the edges are, what place in what county or what place in a time zone. I don't disagree with time zones. I do go crazy when we change the clocks.
yeah, well, as I said, and your comments are spot on. As I said at the beginning of the session, I was all ready to write Congressman or Senator Sinema and tell her, look, I want permanent daylight savings time. But it wasn't as easy as that, because the consideration of the impact of sun time on the circadian rhythm and body time is profound, and I just don't think that I know I didn't appreciate it. So
Thank you.
Yeah, well, actually, to continue the thought on circadian rhythms, I mean, we have a question actually from Terry, who kicked this whole thing off, about, there's going to be, I think he said, there are studies on floating work time shifts. And, of course, I think that they've shown that, people that have to work the night shift is just almost impossible and causes a lot of accidents. So, any insights you have on that general?
yeah, it's a great question, Terry. I have not done any research at all on it. I may do something in the future. But if you want to find some studies, just go to that National Library of Medicine PubMed URL. Just type that much in and you'll come up with, and then plug in studies on work time shifts. You'll come up with a lot of reading.
And then Cher, perhaps the performer, I don't know, just single name Cher, she indicates that in the 1960s, Minneapolis and St. Paul, two different counties, I think they're next to each other, I'm pretty sure, they didn't agree. So one was on Central Standard Time and the other was on Daylight Standard Time. And could this happen again? I guess that gets to the authorities as a state and go down to the county or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I suspect that was before 1966 or just after, during 1966. But as we discussed in some of the rulemaking, mayors and county commissioners were sending requests in to be relocated. There's got to be some control from Congress, and there's got to be more control at the state level. So the states are this is going to percolate for several years, even if the legislation is passed this year, as people get more settled in and experience whatever the legislation brings us.
Okay, and here's a question related to time in a slightly different way. So some people are always early, some folks are always late. Is there a known reason for such leanings? And I'll just add, I know culturally there's a big difference between countries, but certainly even if the same culture of the U.S., it does seem to be people who run late and people that always get there earlier right on time. So I don't know if does that relate to being a lark or
well, that would be my thought.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it does seem to correlate a little bit with being a lark or a night owl, but I'm not sure why. Maybe someone can study that at some point in time. Yeah. And then can you address how China handles being on one time?
I have not gone into that. I think I mentioned that the sun time line for that time zone is just about centered on Beijing. So my view is they don't much care how the rest of the country feels about it. And, I don't know. I just haven't searched around for any articles or anything of that nature concerning China.
Yeah, I think I'd read that if you're way over on, I guess, the western part, the work starts at 11, I guess it would be, or 12, that they just have the day starts later on the clock, so to speak. Yeah.
You're correct. I just read something in the last week, primarily in the Uyghur section of China. If you travel there and you talk to someone more of the Chinese extraction, they'll have Beijing time, but if you talk to a Uyghur and ask them for the time, they'll have the local time. So you're right, but it depends on who you ask.
Yeah, sure. Here's another question. It's a bit lengthy, but it says items such as court documents, applications, proposals that need to be filed by a certain time on a certain date need to ensure that they know the local time. If more states change their daylight standards from other states in the same time zone, such due dates will need to be identified in such a manner as the flyers can easily determine what the deadline is. Yeah, that could cause some real problems.
You're absolutely right, and that's why I think it's going to take a couple of years for this to roll out, even once Congress passes a law of some sort. But I think that there's consideration. A lot of these proposals that have gone nowhere so far in the individual states, there is a provisional clause that says, for instance, Virginia, DC, and Maryland will always be on the same time. And Ontario, Canada is looking at going to permanent standard, I think, but they'll only do so if Quebec and the state of New York do the same. So there's some regional appreciation for the differences, but more importantly, to stay aligned with the principal business and commercial partners that they have.
Okay, I just let people know I have opened the chat to everybody. If you want to, put something in there in terms of how you've enjoyed the presentation, any thoughts you have. So I think we are kind of coming to a close. It looks like we don't have any questions in the queue. I don't see any hands raised. Laura, do you see any?
Not right now.
No. Okay.
Well, I have a question for you. So this notion of fashionably late, with my daughter, I wonder if there is it genetic being late, or is it is it inherited, or something that you develop in your culture?
Well, individual chronotype is going to have an impact. Individual personality is going to have an impact. I suspect it might be partly culture, and certainly the genes are there too. So it's all of them, I'm afraid.
I would agree. Thanks.
Okay, well, I think
I was going to
Tom,
comment
yeah, I didn't know if I cleared that. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, Tom, we got a little time.
I was going to comment on circadian rhythms. When I was in my graduate school days, I spent a summer being a camp counselor in Maine, and every now and then they gave us a day off, and I took it to go back to Boston to visit friends and a roommate. And I got there and they said, well, you're welcome. And, I had arranged it ahead of time. And they said, but you probably won't, line up with our schedule, because for the summer, we sleep during the day and we get up and interact and work during the night. So circadian rhythms can change, because these were people I knew who during the school year worked during the day and slept at night.
That's interesting.
So that's circadian rhythms can change.
Okay, well, I think there you have it. Topic we usually only think about twice a year. I want to thank Michael Stewart for illuminating the topic. And Michael, do you have any concluding thoughts?
Well, thanks for allowing me to share my journey and evolution in thinking about how we ought to approach daylight savings time. It's complex business and therefore best to go slow, educate each other, engage with our elected officials at the state, regional, and federal levels. The real expert in this area of legislative education and engagement is a gent by the name of Scott Yates. He has a hashtag lock the clock, one word, and he is a real expert. Thanks to Chris, Laura, David, and Terry. Stay calm, stay well, and carry on.
Okay, thank you all for joining us.